But one thing I kind of wanted to bring up, and we're going to be talking about the Greg Harton editorial momentarily here, and we're kind of a bit of time crunch. Shannon's got to roll. But I wanted to get all your reactions to this, because this is one that you guys don't know about, but a person who also cropped up in the newspaper responding to the editorial was our old pal Dale Holland. And here's what he says in response to Greg Harton's editorial about public cable access TV. He is correct in that the channel could better serve the community, but there are producers who abuse freedom of speech. We're back to the concept of abuse of freedom of speech by producing shows in an effort to shock. Some have put themselves on the fringes of society, and now they seem angry at not being accepted and seek adolescent attention by beaming repulsive shows into our living room, like flushing toilets. That takes imagination. TV.
It sure does.
Well,
He's still
Dan,
on it.
I really like that Bikes, Blues, and Barbecues down there. That had a real creep value to it. I actually
You know,
appreciate
I
that.
tried for the first several years of my life to fit in, that I was apparently just plain born different.
Well,
So,
what
you
is the
know,
problem?
I did not put myself on the fringes of
I'm sorry, it's
society.
the first time we, I guess it's the first time.
I haven't heard this.
And what is his deal about the damn toilet show?
I don't know.
How many
It's like-
years ago did that air?
Yeah, it's
Did he
like this
throw up
Yeah,
or something when it aired?
it's like the guy. I don't know. It's with all these.
Dude, we made other shows.
Yeah, dude, I know. It's like with
For
all
7
these
years.
things. Yeah, with all these things, you know, it's like, okay, like if there's a point that most of these people take, it's know your enemy, and unfortunately they don't. And so here's this guy who measures us by the standard, you know, pun not intended, by the standard of a show that we did like 5 years ago, and that's all he's got.
I'd also like to answer.
It wasn't a great show.
You know,
it's,
you know,
And that was also a bit of satire that was used to make a certain point, but he didn't obviously grasp the satirical content behind the show.
they never do.
But another thing,
Is
they
that
put
it?
themselves on the fringes of society.
okay, well, yeah. Okay.
That was my
Let me say
complaint.
something. Let me say this.
Say what?
We put ourselves on the fringes of society.
Excuse me?
If society basically would allow me to be what I want to do and do the sort of programming, we could run our stuff prime time, 8 o'clock or Saturday morning. It is not us that puts ourselves upon the fringes of society. It is society that puts us upon its fringes.
But even at that, there are moments when we, dare I say it, we move among the mortals. When we, it's not like we sit out on
Incognito, as a golden shower of rain, or perhaps a ram or a giant white bull. Read your favorite mythology.
it's not like we're friggin' lepers here, you know, we can move among them.
We're afraid of leopard.
Really? It's, I mean,
We
these
must
are people
try
that
that.
build gates around their community, you know. I mean,
Yeah, and
Oh gee, you built a gate around your community, and just because you happen to build it on the other side of my house rather than putting my house on the inside, somehow I've put myself on the fringe of society as if I could control where you decide to build your gates, as if I could control where you decide to build your morals, and if I could control how narrow you decided to build the confines of your minds.
Well,
Oh,
very good.
my mistake. Sorry, apparently I was supposed to use my telepathic powers to make you like me just the way I
Yeah,
am.
I'm sorry. I didn't see the sign saying I had to use the other water fountain or sit on the back of the bus, you know.
Or not eat at the
Oops.
lunch counter. And you know, if society would ever admit that no matter what color my hair is, it doesn't affect my ability to do just as good a job at whatever I choose to do,
We
then,
put ourselves on the fringes of society?
you know,
But yeah, and another thing, are we all wait, there's more.
There's more.
Yeah, okay. Is he suggesting that we are always on the fringes of society? Like, let's say, if we go and do something, God help us all, if we go and do something normal, you know, which is pretty damned often, if we should end up in a church or a synagogue, if we go to the symphony, if we go to a nice restaurant, you know, do we have to have like a letter burned onto our forehead?
Scarlet A on our chests.
The big F that says freak, because, you know, yeah,
Gold
it's
star.
interesting because
On the arm.
we make programs like this that we are automatically on the fringes of society.
How about a
at
big
all
triangle?
times.
Yeah, it's yeah.
Yeah,
What
because
is, what
well, what
in
the guy, I don't know.
Go to the
Well, the
symphony,
problem I have
you'll
with
see me
this-
there. Go to the Walton Arts Center, you'll
And-
see me
To
there.
continue.
And as he presents this, it's I mean,
Bloody idiots.
where was I? Okay, so
Fringes of society.
Now they
Fringe-
seem angry at not being
No
accepted.
VDA allowed.
yeah, and so it's such okay. Fringe society, fringe culture is not
Go
acceptable.
stand on
Is
my
not
lawn and
valid.
hold a lamp, boy.
Not accept.
Yeah, is not acceptable or valid.
They're little
Now they
jockey
seem
cats.
angry, and now anger is not valid, and at not being accepted, and seek adolescent attention by being adolescent attention.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
the adolescent attention is why we wrote articulate rebuttals to all of this.
I don't want to be
Right.
accepted by the likes of you.
How
And the
angry-
best thing that Dale Holland could come up with for intelligent argument was kiss my butt. So I mean,
Yeah. Oh,
you know, I'm sorry. Who's being adolescent?
Well,
the
it's-
Starling rhetoric
And
there.
how
Maybe he
angry-
should have screamed cooties, cooties, and ran.
You know, I mean,
How angry have we been, really? I mean, in this
he
legislative
recanted, you know, and apologized
I
and
think
realized
we've
that
actually,
still.
we've actually been fairly upbeat about this whole thing. I think we've been pretty bloody generous, actually.
Yeah.
It's just completely blithering stupid as far as I'm concerned. I mean,
That's-
angry at not being accepted, don't make assumptions. I mean, you know, angry
We should-
perhaps in some instances, angry at the fact that you can lead someone to truth, but you can't make them think. you know?
Here's a concept. How about this one? We make the sort of programming we like, and people hate us for it.
And we make the sort of programming that a
But
large
not
chunk of the
everybody.
community likes,
Right, right.
but certain people hate us for it and try to get rid of it because they also, I think, just wish that segment of the community didn't exist, or if they must exist, because somebody's got to clean
How
the
about,
toilets.
yeah, how about this?
Why can't they shut up?
We make the sort of programming that we like to make, and there are those people who would like to put us on the fringes of society.
For
I
making
mean,
it.
it's a lot like saying that, you know, if you're in South Africa, basically the people running South Africa during the 1980s said, you know what, those blacks like to stay on the fringes of the cities, on the other side of those gates that we build. Why are they like that?
Yeah,
you
if
know?
they just
Where,
clean
like those
themselves
armed
up.
guards are, you know, I mean, they're always on the fringes, and it's because they're angry, because, you know, they do things, you know, that
It's
make us
such a
not
let
want to
them
accept
eat
us.
cake statement. It really is. It's a
God.
complete let them eat cake because it all comes down to, you know, well, why can't those, you know, ghetto kids just clean themselves up and pay attention in school and stop fathering crack babies and start shooting each other in gangs? And well, you know, then we'd like them and we'd let them into our country clubs and, you know, our exclusive cocktail parties. It's like, well,
Buy a suit and SUV.
yeah, I'm in a real hurry to buy a suit and SUV and
Yeah,
have 15 kids. And anyway.
PTA.
but you know, they present themselves as artists and intellectuals, but to me their shows are without wit or imagination. Yeah, the one he's actually seen.
The few
Well, to me,
minutes of
his
it.
commentary is
Well,
about good imagination.
he must have only seen one because he keeps referring to the same show over and over.
Apparently we've made 2 shows.
Yeah.
I hate it when people
yeah,
state opinion as fact.
and so he trudges out the usual nonsense, but I just kind of wanted to run all that by
Well,
you.
let's
for
hear the
everything,
nonsense.
so.
The
Yeah, you'll shut up.
Well, you've heard the best part of the nonsense. Mostly it goes into yada 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 the taxpayer. It is unlikely that viewer complaints about content will have much effect on improving the shows. Well,
And I
Use of a
should
community resource for
should
their
point out
ugliness
that
at taxpayer
Okay,
expense.
we should say this right here, right now. Where does the money come from to finance the cat? It comes from
franchise fees.
franchise fees, from the profits of the cable company, for the shopping network,
And what does that
for
have to
Friends,
do
for
with
all of these things.
taxes?
And what is it? Oh, that money basically goes back into the community, so people like us, people like you, people like anyone can come down here and do a TV show.
But what does that have to do with taxes? He's saying taxpayers' money.
Well,
Help
these people are always fond of invoking.
No
that.
taxes. No taxes go anywhere then. Be confused. Taxpayers not put money into it.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't think.
As a
I
matter of
should point out too, you know, there's all this talk of quality. Oh, we've got to make these shows of a better quality. Well, the thing is, how's this? If they would notice the level of skill in editing and in production values, the VDA, which is the stuff that we air, viewer discretion advised, the things that are run late at night, the stuff we do, compare that to the average church broadcast or to the average boring travel log.
Which apparently is done with someone with a handheld camera and Parkinson's.
Yeah, and just compare the level of editorial skill.
Actually, I've been guilty of the Parkinson's case.
No, you've been guilty of 40 cam. That's a whole different category of advice.
But, you know, if you look at the sheer quality of editing, I think the VDA has most of the, you know, has a lot of the other producers' charm.
Yeah.
So it's a false argument.
Well, it's never that. When they say quality, what they mean is that basically no one's making money from it, and it doesn't appeal to the country club set.
Hey, Jeff, what was your earlier statement about, this is not planned since I've never seen this before now, but I can glance right at it. Your earlier statement was, public access is a great idea if we could just keep those darn whoever out, if we could just keep the community out of it. If we could keep the public out, those darn intellectual Negroes. Access is a great idea, but it should serve the wider community with viewer input. What are we? We don't view? We're not part of the community?
Yeah.
Rather than a playhouse for a handful of selfish producers. Which producers are those?
He brings us something down
Selfish?
and again.
Selfish? Who's down there at the meetings?
You were selfish. We actually used the medium for what it was supposed to be used for.
Who teaches editing classes? Who's down
Selfish.
there volunteering?
Who is trying to exclude who?
Who's
Who is
volunteering
basically
for
saying
Freedom Fest?
these people don't have a right to come down and use the station or abusing free speech
My
and are
God.
wrong? Well, these other people should be doing it. Who is basically trying to put, bars around free speech? It's not us.
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
Well, no, and the
So,
whole
is
thing.
Dan Holland volunteering for Freedom Fest to make money for community access?
Yeah, well, here's the whole thing. I mean, first
What
off,
do you mean selfish? Where's this selfish thing come from? Do as much work for community
he's-
access as these people have done
Who
on
does
their
this stuff
own.
for free?
well, no, he does. No, I mean,
Yeah.
he's
Just productions again.
he's brought this to the fore again and again about a handful of selfish producers dominating the show. And as we've said in other shows, it's like this fringe VDA type stuff makes up less than 1% of the content.
Still, I try to tolerate those who are blowing off their anger. No, you don't, because if you were trying to tolerate them, you wouldn't feel it necessary to write 3 columns of rant in the
And what is this
Change here.
anger crap? I mean,
What's the 1%?
Yeah, well, again, it's just anger is not valid.
And understand that without talent, what is left but vandalizing access behind freedom of speech, the last refuge of scoundrels? Oh yeah, I remember some scoundrels who were hiding behind freedom of speech and expression. They wrote a little document you might remember called the Declaration of Independence. Remember the Boston Tea Party? How about the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere? All those people were doing those actions indeed under what then became, written by them, the theory of free speech. Yep. Oh, remember Rosa Parks? Yeah, she was a scoundrel too. You remember Martin Luther King? Yeah, scoundrel. Yeah.
Picasso, scoundrel.
Scoundrel, yeah.
John Waters, scoundrel.
Yeah,
Big ass gun.
Yeah, well, we all know John Waters is scoundrel. It is unlikely that viewer complaints about content will have much effect on improving shows. Well, good, shut up then. And you're right there, just sign it. Though cable users foot the bill, as viewers the only right is to switch channels. Oh, I see, so Cox Cable walks into your house, puts a 45 in your mouth, and around that metal phallus, you're forced to mumble, "Oh, if I please want cable, yes, please." You can just not buy cable. There's this thing called public television, and I say the PC liberals out there are pretty certain that that has content and value, and you can just watch that. The Discovery Channel, it's pretty good. Watch that. Show content is the elephant in the living room. The thing that matters about access to most citizens of Fayetteville and can't be discussed. Really? What is this? It's being discussed. We're discussing it. You're discussing it. Seems like a discussion to me.
Feels like
Grr. I am irritable now. This is like 3 columns of outright lies. Why have I not seen this? Why can't it be
Anyways,
discussed? There's no reason it can't be discussed.
What can
Give
be
me a
discussed?
reason.
What's the white elephant?
The elephant, the content.
Content.
Show
We're
content.
discussing it.
You discuss content. Emenegger discuss content.
We
Holden,
spend
Norhart.
Okay, here we go. You can't discuss the content because you object to it, and if you discuss content and say you want to censor people, then everyone knows that you're a Nazi.
You can't discuss
you
content
can-
because you can't
You
perceive
come out of or if you object to it, you should just come out of the closet. You'll feel better. And yes, people will perceive you as
Cigar! Cigar!
but
and you're so authoritative, running everything on this one show that aired 5 years ago.
I get it. You can't discuss content because you've only seen one show of the Lemurs, because you've lost your dictionary, and because, unfortunately, apparently the last thing you watched with any content was like the lesbianism episode of Will and Grace. Now I will be accused of censorship. Wow, there's one sensible thing in here. I believe producers should produce as many offensive shows as they desire, but not on the taxpayer's dime. We're not on the taxpayer's dime. So
Non-issue.
I can't think of when free speech is free.
I can't write a sentence. Anyways, go ahead.
Free, apparently, of all grammar and punctuation. However, I can't see anyone's speech being stifled. You can say anything on the internet. Actually, after the Patriot Act, no, you can't. And there's several other little acts that snuck right through Congress you might want to take a look at. But what you can't do on the internet, even if you still could say anything, is you cannot guarantee that your community will have a crack at looking at it. Unless you want to go around putting up flyers everywhere all over your community at your own expense saying, check out this website.
He's like comparing apples and oranges. What he's saying is basically like, sure, you can have free speech. You can mail a letter out to every single house and say whatever you wanted to.
Okay, guys.
Anyway, I think it's
Guys,
called spam.
We're gonna, there's maybe one more thing I want to bring up on this, but we're gonna have to let Shannon do her thing now.
Because you can edit, don't worry.
This is so dumb. I don't see anything else that's even worthy of ranting, but I'm sorry
Anyway,
to seize thing
I'm
and rant.
sorry.
Okay, that's cool, but, okay, Shannon's
I need a
kinda,
baseball bat, pardon me.
Shannon's got a motor here, so we're gonna let her do her response to the Harton article, which was printed in the Northwest Arkansas Times, and take it away, Shannon.
Okay, well, I'm just going to read this verbatim as it did appear in the Times. I'm responding to Greg Harton's article, Northwest Arkansas Times, June 15th, entitled Sinking to New Lows. This document attempts to critique a program which aired on community access television a month ago. The program did not air the other night, as the author claimed. Mr. Harton did not even bother mentioning this program by name, but any cat viewer will know that he is referring to the Abbey of the Lemur. Mr. Harton's editorial is misguided on a wide array of points, the most patently insulting of which is that this program serves no other function than promoting shock value. This statement can only have issued from someone who's failed to objectively analyze the show. This program has consistently, for nearly 6 years, provided social, cultural, artistic, religious, and political commentary. Yes, the show uses shock value, but only if one wishes to obstinately continue finding references to the human body objectionable. Yes, there was low humor and questionable language, but make no mistake, there was also commentary about social issues and politics.
Well, there was low humor and questionable language on Apocalypse Now.
The show in question aired from midnight to 2 o'clock in the morning, a time slot reserved for adult-oriented programming. It is scarcely imaginable that any grown adult could find such programming offensive. In fact, the vast majority of people calling into the show enjoyed it immensely, but no one's addressing that. Instead, all of the coverage is being handed to one lone detractor. The show does indeed possess a certain amount of inherent shock value. That's because shock value is an attention-derived mechanism, directing the audience's attention toward a greater series of issues. Most of the modern artistic movements were decried for using so-called shock value. Surrealism, abstract expressionism, and pop art were all denounced as worthless by reactionary provincial art critics who knew precious little about art.
To mention Maplethorpe.
History does indeed repeat itself. Artists make art, and critics call it worthless. Note that it's not the critics who are immortalized in history books. The real problem seems to be a class issue. A group of working-class people got on television and presented their opinions in working-class language, which is apparently threatening to some sectors of the community. This program does indeed have value. It is certainly not, as Mr. Harton suggests, harmful to the media itself, nor is it harmful to any viewer possessing average intelligence. This program can invoke a long string of shock value precedents, ranging from the Armory Show of 1913, Miller vs. California, the novels of William S. Burroughs, or Marilyn Manson's music. Note that these precedents all had a sizable audience. So does this program. The show's following is quite loyal. So let the critics, in Mr. Harton's own words, turn their noses up at the stench of lewd and vulgar programs. Meanwhile, the rest of the community will be watching and learning. And if learning isn't valuable to this community, then what is?
Bravo, bravo. Is that a hand for our cult leader?
Cult leader. Well, I changed the film speed because I forgot.
Cult leader and chimney sweep.
Yeah.
Hello. Hello. Anyway, so now we are talking about Greg Harton's editorial. Fury or Jet, do you want to take the helm here?
Let's see. I would like, if I may, to take you on a journey.
Science fiction. Sorry.
I would like, if someone would go ahead and read Chuck, because like you're a better orator than I am. And basically, do you have Hartman's article on you?
I've got your responses to it, which I'm assuming that's the whole article.
Well, it's that article broken into pieces. If you prefer to read it off of this sheet, I've actually like highlighted the things that are his, the paragraphs that are his. So if you want to read through,
Yeah, it's all
and it's basically all the ones that have a little asterisk beside them, and also have quotation marks around them.
So you want me to actually read the article verbatim?
I think that we should. I
Okay.
think that we should before we rip it apart. People need to know what it says.
Give the man his say before we humiliate him publicly.
Okay.
And you don't have to read the responses, just the quotations.
The community's button is being pushed again by a group of video-based challengers of all things tasteful. The other night, a month ago, flipping around the channels on my television, I came across a recent installment of a community access television broadcast that has long been at the apex of the local debate on taste, free expression, government funding of a community access channel, and whether any boundaries can or should exist for what's shown on publicly funded television.
Cool, you're at the apex of something. Rock!
I always wanted to be an apex.
But how does that sink into
Instead
the
of just an
lowest?
8.
That would be a nadir, not an apex. Read geometry textbook.
The program's participants, known for their push-the-limits vulgar approach to whatever mush they want to push for the viewers, are at it again, using this medium to display their tiresome demonstrations of simulated sexual acts that somewhere in their minds make some sort of point. All the while, the makers of this drivel delude themselves into thinking they are making relevant social commentary and that pushing the limits of free speech is, in and of itself, a worthwhile exercise. No bigger meaning or purpose, just seeing how far they can go before someone objects, then patting themselves on the back for prompting the revelation that some folks find these things offensive. Now, that takes some talent.
Wow, that was grammatically inept.
What a waste of time and energy. And they simultaneously hurt the perception of an important community service thankfully offered by Fayetteville City government, the Community Access Channel. Second verse, same as the first. This cable channel, operated via contract with Fayetteville by the nonprofit Community Access Television Group known as CAT, offers the electronic equivalent of a town soapbox. Citizens can use it to broadcast to local cable subscribers any program they produce, and the channel offers a wide range of offerings. Some churches rebroadcast their services on community access. Other nonprofit organizations use it to get their message out. Friends for Fayetteville, TM, has produced public issue shows on which local decision makers were questioned. None of the shows themselves are funded by the city, but city funding is involved in providing the channel cameras that any citizen can use to develop a program and staffing to operate the channel. Producers are responsible for identifying shows that need a viewer discretion advised label that garners showing times only between midnight and 4 a.m. Most cities don't offer public access channels because it's viewed as opening a huge can of worms. Federal law requires companies to give local access channels, public access, educational access, and government access to cities that ask for them. Fayetteville has the other two in form of the government channel and UATV.
We have 3. We're cool. I think you may have skipped a spot there.
I think I may have.
These other communities simply don't find the benefits of operating a public access channel, which can be incredibly resourceful for the community, worth the headaches created by those who want to censor others.
Presented by the few who amuse themselves by sinking lower and lower in the hopes of getting a reaction. And the reaction is their victory. Yeah, the reaction is our victory, and snotty provincial editorials. I mean, what a victory that is.
Yay! Wow. Is that the consolation prize?
I feel fulfilled.
I'm just reveling in my triumph here.
Yeah, I like it when drooling monkeys fling excrement at me. Yeah, that I consider that to be a victory, all right. I like being
I could be
crucified by
swimming.
primates.
I could be riding my bicycle.
I could be making art.
I could be arranging my sock drawer.
Yeah, you need to do that, actually.
And the reaction is
I'll
their
bring it, you
victory.
can do it now.
Nothing more meaningful or significant, just the fact that they can incite someone to respond. Get a life, please.
Pause. Nothing more meaningful than significant, just the fact they can incite someone to respond. I'll rant about that later, but I'd like to point out here that the point of art is in getting people to interact with the art and respond to it. That's meaningful. Stop contradicting yourself internally within each sentence.
Well, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, and I think we've already shot a million holes
This is
into
this
it.
beautiful exercise in paradox. Pray continue.
Okay.
Writer.
Free speech is, get a life, please. Free speech is, or should be, an activity among the most cherished and important to all Americans. And the free expression of ideas is the fountain from which this debate flows.
Yeah, the ideas that we express freely.
Yeah.
At least we have some.
That's the idea behind the first Freedom Fest scheduled for July 4th on downtown Fayetteville Square. It is designed to be an Independence Day celebration of our freedom to express our views freely. Our freedom to express our views freely?
Wow, grammatical ineptitude. Get a thesaurus. I'm sure your word processing program has one.
Okay. Free express our views. Blah,
It's
blah.
a shift F. Wait, hang on a second.
That's okay. What the?
Shift F7 in Word.
All right.
It'll
Yeah.
help.
What, Mr. Horton?
Freedom to express our views freely, and it should be celebrated. Fortunately, that constitutional recognition of my inalienable right to express ideas protects my ability to note this. The free speech that protected Martin Luther King Jr.'s campaign to better our treatment of fellow human beings, that guarantees no government interference with the speech of advocates for and against abortion or marijuana or equal rights, that assures Democrats can rail against Republicans and vice versa, that same free speech that certainly protects against the government imposing limits on the garbage produced by these slovenly souls who think they're making a point.
And for the grammaticians among you, that was a colon followed by 2 semicolons separating 3 dangling clauses. Ow! This is an editor of a newspaper, folks.
Well,
Did anyone else get that sentence? Because I didn't.
Well, there was I don't know, more license with the language taken with that than Kerouac ever used, I think.
William S. Burroughs, maybe.
Well, at least he's creative in that sense.
Yeah, he does get his licks in a little.
He writes like Hunter S. Thompson, but by accident.
These folks appear to be Larry Flint wannabes. The publisher of Hustler magazine has pushed so many limits that many of the free speech court decisions center on his activities.
Good for him.
Other cases have come from government acts designed to stifle the expressions of the Ku Klux Klan while allowing more acceptable speech. Actually, the Larry Flints and the Ku Klux Klans of the world have expressed this nation into uncomfortable corners. Have pressed. Sorry, that was my mistake.
That was Freudian. Expressed this nation into uncomfortable corners. I'd say that's
Press
more
this
accurate.
nation into uncomfortable corners, testing our commitment to keeping government from controlling free speech and the freedom of expression. It's tempting, but Americans cannot give in to the occasional desire to shut someone up as long as we want our own ability to express ourselves freely. But our local nabobs don't even come close to Flint or the
Hi,
KKK.
Nabob.
Ah, they are nabob.
Won't you be my
Nabob.
Nabob?
Let's play. Hey, let's run around the field and come back and find out which nabob has collected the most chiggers.
It's a beautiful day in my neighborhood.
Anyways,
But our local nabobs don't even come close to Flint or the KKK. I love this stuff. At least those guys had identifiable purpose that they were pursuing when they got into their free speech clashes.
Well, it's good that he can identify pornography and racism, but apparently thought's a little beyond it.
Yeah, apparently art's a little beyond it. Can't get past, can't see satire, doesn't understand the art movements, punk culture, or anything else.
But, you know,
Well,
naked women with all orifice stuffed with neat things and, you know, racists in bed sheets, you can go for
Well,
that.
those are fine, yeah. Flint was trying to start a money-making business and saw his way to fame and fortune, was producing magazines of naked women appealing to more prurient desires and discussions.
Hey, wait a minute, there's that prurient word again from that other thing that other guy wrote.
Yeah.
I'm
Hey,
gonna
don't worry,
get
Greg. We're going to start selling coffee mugs and T-shirts.
Prurient.
So we're going to be okay.
I need a t-shirt that says prurient. What do you think? Am I prurient?
I need a T-shirt that says Nabob.
We could be the Prurient Nabob Productions. It's better than Retarded Minimalist Productions or Bupkis Productions.
The KKK's the KKK's overarching mission was to spew white pride and hatred of any race or anyone who dared suggest being white wasn't all there was to being right.
Woo! Go bigots!
Yeah. The point is not that they are admirable, but that their free speech cases came as they conducted their lives pursuing something other than just testing people's patience or the pure desire to spark a negative reaction. Yeah, that's what we're all about.
Yeah, we love having people burn, you know, videos on our lawns.
Yawn. Anyway, the lewd and crude acts of our local performers on this CAP program are not likely illegal, but they're wrong and serve no other purpose than to incite a reaction. Okay, let me see here. When all is said and done, such a goal is a waste that results in no positive contribution to the community or even the betterment of individuals. I beg to differ. This time, a citizen has filed a formal complaint about the content. Yeah, that's never happened before. So
What occurs?
imagine. So we'll be hearing more as the CAP board and possibly the city's telecommunications board review the complaint. Yes, you'll be hearing a lot,
Oh, gee.
believe me.
And that individual was not a tree protester, so basically we should acknowledge that.
But you won't be hearing from me because I'm going to go listen to my Donny Osmond CDs and contemplate my heterosexuality. If you don't catch the reference, you don't like community access enough. Yay, how's that for some elitism? Is that enough elitism? Okay.
That rocks. That's some great elitism. And while the producers of the show think they are warriors for free speech, they are for no good reason or result harming the medium itself. Well, I can't wait to take that one apart.
I think it
In
was...
some sort of unstated way we're harming. Anyways,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, let's just save that one
I've
for
heard you say
dessert.
it, yeah.
Well,
let's say that.
I've heard that before, and I really want to take
Like
it.
you saved that frosted brownie for after the steak. Let's hang on.
That'll
to
be
that
our
one.
tiramisu. Yeah.
Liquid tiramisu right there.
While CAT officials cannot ban a program based on content unless it's obscene as defined by court cases, libelous, slanderous, or used to incite a riot,
Well,
They
heck, I
should-
guess he got you on that rioting thing.
He's read the law. It's almost as if he had that one thing that you included in the video.
Maybe somebody emailed it to him.
Maybe someone handed it to him.
What do you think? At the city council meeting?
It would explain why he saw it last night instead of a month ago.
Yeah. They should at least join the rest of us in turning up their noses at the stench of lewd and vulgar programs. While the First Amendment guarantees a right to produce such rubbish, it doesn't require that we should. Anyway.
Well,
Anyway.
Sure. Your Bob?
Gluten vulgar programming. Smells like censorship.
Okay. Read your thing, because this, it's perfect. It's perfect. It responds to this in every single sort of way. It says all that I think that needs to be said.
Do you like me better now? Maybe? See, and now I'm trying to be accepted and
Think
fit
happy
in.
thoughts.
This is a positive reflection of the community.
See, I'm accepted and I fit in and they love me now because I can keep this face on even as I bend over and they wait.
Now she's using positive. She's doing something positive for the community.
Yeah, well, I provide production value. That's my purpose.
Would you like fries with that, sir? Yes, I would be happy to push your cart outside. Oh, yes, I will deliver your stuff. Let me build your houses. Oh, no, I don't want to come down and do a TV show, but I'd be more than happy to do a great review of your favorite restaurant and business and social organization.
And I understand about the paint cut. Yes, I'll just go lick out your toilet again. Oh, I see. I can't work in your office because I don't look like I was raised on wonderful cosmetics and in a Porsche. Okay, I guess I'll go vacuum the carpet again. Sorry. The purpose of art is not to sit politely in the gallery, to sit quietly on a living room wall and match your new Italian leather sofa, or not to sit meekly on your TV screen or flat page of novel and entertain you in the 30 minutes between the end of your workday and the beginning of dinner. Real art comes screaming down off the walls, visceral, rampant, bleeding its blazing colors into your life. Art exists to change you, but there is no change without a quota of pain, however small. Let me clarify. Art does this because art is a human thing which serves a human function in a human society. We can see this in that the very first songs told stories. They cried to the god for rain or for answer. They roused for battle or the hunt, celebrated, aroused, and reveled. Life, theology, blood, sex, food, celebration, and struggle are the weighty topics that were touched upon by this early art. To experience these things brings change, and as I already said, the process of change is often painful. The easy path would be to avoid them altogether. Luckily, however, for our ancestors of over nearly a century ago, they could not avoid these issues because there was no choice. This was their daily life, and they had to experience them in the normal routine. But in modern America now, it's the privilege of certain social classes to opt out of these human experiences. They don't have to wrestle with their feelings about God or right or wrong or the nature of reality, because they can simply go to church one day a week and have it all dealt with for you in a prepackaged list of what you should think. You don't have to lift your voice in song or create art or create video or write or do any creativity at all, because the radio and television will do that for you. You don't have to design and sew your clothing so that you can decide on a personal style or look, because Calvin Klein, Bugle Boy, and Tommy Hilfiger will do that for you. This is not supposed to be some rant about how the moral character of Americans is degenerating because we don't engage in self-sufficient, hard physical labor all the time, though I do wonder at times. I am merely pointing out our culture has given a large class of people the choice to opt out of activities that by their very nature force you to confront the great issues of a normal human life. Yes, a person still has to suffer a little bit, but for most of the hard issues out there, for that certain class, there's someone there to take care of that for you. That would be the working class, namely us. As a matter of fact, anyone has to fight very hard to even be allowed the right to confront some of them. As an example, you have to buy a license to hunt and kill your own food, or fight hard if you actually want the right to lay out and bury your own dead. And in a cultural sense, you have to struggle for the right to think your own thoughts. There is no social class or subculture that's completely immune to this on all levels in our society today, but the upper middle class is the most immune to these experiences of any. Art, you see, comes out of experience. An artist creates art in an attempt to deal with experience, understand it, express it, and share it with others. Conversely, the lack of experience creates lack of art and creates a lack of people capable of understanding art. It creates a lack of people who are willing to be challenged by a piece of art, to meet it on its own terms and draw from it its meaning and relevance to their own lives, which would be the people who are now writing editorials and complaints about the content of certain shows. It's a lot easier to become offended and claim something is not art than it is to subject oneself to introspection and self-examination. It's much easier to point fingers in scorn and derision than to change or learn or grow. The unwillingness to perceive content or the inability to understand it and deal with it does not prove a lack of content, as Jet and everyone else has said before. It rather points out a culturally created lack in the viewer. The ability and privilege of modern American society to, in large point, avoid a direct and hands-on contact with life-changing experiences created what I like to call culture light. A new, less filling, low-sodium, low-calorie culture. A low-fat culture that tastes just like the original, well, almost. An imitation pasteurized, cheese-flavored, individually wrapped culture product by Kraft. Just as Pepsi One, as an example, exhibits all the external characteristics of a soda drink without actually being one, so does this new culture appear on the outside to fulfill the role of a culture without being one. Just as Pepsi One displays all the signs of being a beverage without providing any nourishment or sustenance for the body, so does a certain segment of modern culture fail to provide true nourishment for the human soul or character. Just as Pepsi One therefore acts mainly as a vehicle for fooling you into believing your thirst is satisfied, while in reality it's only acting as a system for delivery of caffeine and cancer-causing food colorings, well, I will only say this: have you ever thought about why it's called pop culture? And so in the end, because of all this, we wind up with creations like Britney Spears, plastic, prepackaged, talking the products and paraphernalia of the sponsors that own her, an unattainable image framed in an imaginary perfect reality that's been created only to set her off like a silver-plated ring sets off the false shine of cubic zirconium. Britney Light, capable of displaying all the outer characteristics of a musician or artist without actually being one, capable of creating songs, at least with the help of her writers and choreographers, that offend no one and inflame no one and make no one feel anything new, but hey, who cares, you can dance to it, right? If you call that dancing, with every thrust and grind of her hips choreographed and graphed demographically on some advertiser's chart. Britney, capable of sexuality without sensuality, of lust without love, or at least mutual respect and liking. And we wind up with Tommy Hilfiger shirts, capable of acting as a shirt without displaying any individual style or preference. It's so easy. You could just put one on and you're in style and well-dressed by default, without having to take any risks. Why not just tattoo on your chest, insert brand name fad of the month here? The products and trapping of culture light take all decision and risk conveniently out of your hands, and choice and discernment are replaced by prepackaged loyalties to brand names and subculture affiliations. It takes away love and gives us Cosmopolitan and 17 magazine. Steals literature and gives us romance novels, John Grisham and the Oprah Winfrey Book Club. It excises drama and gives us Scooby-Doo movies and daytime television. It removes sustenance and gives us McDonald's, Slim Fast, and Coca-Cola. It steals fear and struggle and triumph, but gives us the secondhand thrill of amusement park roller coasters and the vicarious adrenaline of horror movies. And the first thing taught to every child is that we need these things. And we don't need this. We don't need you. As a matter of fact, if we're worried about the degeneration of American morals and family values, we need look no further than this mass-produced, well-advertised hard-sell culture. It's the antithesis of all experiences that drive the human to grow, mature, develop, and change, and create art. All the strongest, most visceral emotions that drive a human to create. Van Gogh didn't paint his Starry Night after an evening watching sitcoms on the sofa with a Bud Light. He starved and froze his ass off in a tiny upstairs bedroom. He was rejected and mocked by critics. He fell in love with prostitutes. He suffered. He died alone. But somewhere in there he found the time to paint. Martin Luther King wasn't inspired to write his greatest speech after he was upset by the racism episode of Will Smith's Fresh Prince of Bel-Air sitcom. He watched sneering rednecks torment his people, and the few Caucasian teenagers to chose to sit with them also tormented their restricted white-only lunch counters and white-only restaurants. And anytime you're disturbed, frightened, bothered, upset, or offended by something, you have that choice that they had, to look inside yourself and engage in a little introspection to find out why it bothers you, to learn a little something about yourself if you're brave and honest, and then maybe to create something that will share it with others. But it's easier not to. And because of that, I can only believe that the recent editorial in the Northwest Arkansas Times says more about the editor's own conflicting thinking than it does about the VDA producers on the CAT statement, because every statement of opinion about these producers and their show is matched with a following free speech lip service disclaimer. We should turn up our noses at these people, and yet the editorial admits there's nothing that can legally be done, and that community access is a medium that provides a valuable community service. So what are we supposed to do then? Are we supposed to snub them in the streets, or shun them, or refuse to speak to them, or, as I said earlier, to suggest something at a more appropriate level of maturity for such a statement? Maybe we could cross our fingers at them and run away screaming, cooties, cooties. I went through the editorial and carefully separated factual statements from statements of opinion. Everyone should try this. If you disregard every little fun First Amendment fact that was thrown in about the laws regulating free expression and the community access's own internal regulations regarding format and air times, we are left with only statements regarding opinion, likes and dislikes. And the opinions presented show that the editor dislikes a good bit of the VDA producer's programming, most especially a certain episode of a certain show, specifically referring to simulated anal penetration. Well, from this we learn that on one level, the editor would like to have the ability to censor and censure these people, and that he is possessed of certain societal taboos regarding sex. And we learn that he views them as lewd and vulgar and immature, but again, those terms are matters of personal opinion, reflecting the holder's own biases and limits. Just those very words were used about the great female nudes of the Italian Renaissance at the time of their creation. Lewd, vulgar, so on and so forth. And sure, they're fine art now, but at the time they were expensive pornography for wealthy gentlemen. Opinions vary, and the opinions of mature individuals in societies do something else. They change over time. So what is it that you view as so mature, Mr. Editor? Well, let's see. On viewing the episode in question, I saw frank expressions of unpopular opinions, thought and opinions that these people had come up with for themselves rather than bought prepackaged, satire, sarcasm, and yes, a certain Andy Kaufman surrealist humor. I saw a lot of social taboos being purposely violated for the purpose of making the watcher self-aware of their own taboos and how arbitrary many of those cultural strictures truly are. And yes, indeed, I did see an act of simulated anal penetration, which, if you listen to the preceding speech and comments made during and after the act, was intended to represent in satire the attitude of the American government and mainstream culture, that'd be you, Mr. Editor, towards any dissenting thinkers. And before you call the participating members of the episode in question immature, you might want to check into the range and scope of their achievements. You might want to check into how many college degrees they have and at what level. In other words, if they're doing something you view as immature, be assured they're doing it intentionally with forethought and considered purpose. Be assured they know the pointlessness in shot for its own sake. Because the mission statement behind the Abbey of Lemur is to point out many of the things I've said in this letter, and more than that, to make people think. That's the agenda you so blithely claim they lack, implying that Larry Flint and KKK are better than the Lemurs by the simple possession of an agenda. Well, theirs is to encourage individuals to think, introspect, and re-examine their own fears and prejudices, which you completely, I might add, failed to do. They don't have to do it on live television, that's true, but you have remote control, and you can turn off the live television and go create something of your own. There's nothing you need to do about the show. There's very little, actually, that you can legally do about it. A spiritually and intellectually and emotionally mature adult would be able to recognize this and not feel it necessary to air their picky and offended emotions in a public forum. Actually, not public forum, because access to that forum is decided by, well, guess who? You. So what legal recourse do you imagine you have to restrict free speech and expression? What right do you assume to choose who may and may not speak and what they may say if they do speak? You admit yourself in the editorial that the Lemurs are well within CAT's regulations regarding the labeling of their program as VDA and the times at which they allow it to air and which it may and may not air. And they've always, in my experience, observed these regulations carefully, much like a black man taking care not to speed when driving through a white neighborhood. As was pointed out to me by a fellow producer, the KKK and Hustler all have their loyal, unoffended, agreeable audiences who enjoy the material presented and find that it reflects their enjoyment and their values. Interestingly enough, they also have a large audience who gives lip service to different values but still buys Hustler, and who is willing to talk about politically correct subjects as far as lack of racism goes. And look, I even have a black friend. See, my token black friend here. But they are closet KKK sympathizers or members, so an interesting point. But as long as the KKK are not lynching black citizens and Larry Flint's not forcing underage girls to pose at gunpoint, they're all well within their rights. If you remember, a large incentive to colonize this continent was that over here no one would be able to tell you what you could and could not believe or like or enjoy. So go take a look at the internet. That's right. Lesbian Asian vampire porn on the internet has a surprisingly loyal following. All kinds of things have a surprisingly loyal following out there. You name it. And no matter how deluded or incorrect you may imagine them to be or believe any of them to be, any of their values to be, they have the inalienable right to believe in them, express them, and further them so long as they're not breaking any other laws in the process of so doing. This, I may add, is the same right which you chose to use to publicly mock and belittle the artistic values and vision of others, even going so far, I might add, as to point out that fact in your article at the same time. I wonder, when is the last time you created anything that truly reflected your deepest heartfelt values? Yours, not the ones somebody else handed you. It would be a better use of your time as far as I'm concerned. And don't try to tell me that your recent editorial qualifies, because the facts you obviously felt compelled to include in the interest of legality and the appearance of fairness, as opposed to the appearance of being a censorship Nazi, were all completely at odds with every opinion that you ventured. So when the facts and the opinions are at complete odds, in my mind that cancels out to a zero sum, and so the editorial says nothing and shows nothing and fulfills no purpose, creatively or otherwise, except to reflect how conflicted and ill-considered the thinking was on this matter. As I said, there are certain classes in America who have the privilege of avoiding intense contact with certain kinds of experience, and I feel that the editorial and the complaints by those who have complained and written letters and editorials reflect their membership in that social class, but the VDA producers come from a different world. A world, as a matter of fact, that supports your world, and that, as a matter of fact, numerically outnumbers your world, and nonetheless gets treated as an underclass and a second-class citizen. The Lemur group, even with college degrees, labors as members of this class because they don't wish to become members of a social class that devotes itself to the avoidance of experience. They don't want to devote themselves to beliefs they've only inherited, not thought out and considered clearly and chosen for themselves. So instead, they labor for you, as your Negroes, socially speaking. And after a 60-hour week of that, instead of sleeping or going and playing a relaxing game of golf or sitting down in front of the television with a remote control, they pick up their cameras and round up their unpaid volunteer actors and staff, who are all volunteering countless hours of their time because they believe in the artistic vision too, and they go engage in the exhausting process of translating a vision, a message, into the medium of their choice. I wonder if any of the detractors and complainers have ever even made a movie, even a 10-minute short. It's hard, expensive, frustrating, and requires planning, forethought, organizational, and problem-solving skills equal to those of Sherlock Holmes. And yet these producers are out there acting, directing, script writing, editing, doing their own makeup, their own special effects, lighting, visual effects, stunts in a recent production by Quarter Moon Productions, coaching their actors, teaching their actors to act, choreography, set design, soundtracks to their own productions, including playing the instruments. So I want to ask you this: do you still believe that simple shock value is incentive enough for a human being to put themselves through that kind of ordeal? You couldn't even do it. Would you like to try it? I mean, I want to see you go ahead and try it after 13 hours on a factory assembly line in 120-degree heat, breathing in the stuff that's floating around, metal filings and whatnot. And then I'd like you to try that with 4 hours of sleep, and I'd like you to try it with no money, and I'd like you to try it after living on a case of ramen for a month because you put your money into your video production. And I'd like you to try and try and try and try and try, and then I'd like you to have editorials spewed at you about how all you do damages the media, and it's only for shock value, and it's only to get nabobs like yourself to respond. Or would having to do all that interrupt your evening's television viewing or your round of golf? What the editorials and complaints are really saying, though they're afraid to come out and say it, is that the complainers wish that people like us did not exist, the working classes. Or if we have to exist, they wish that we weren't part of their community. Or if we have to be part of the community and live in the city, at least we can just shut up and do our jobs, right? And not try to create any art of our own and not try to have our own opinions. I'd say you wish we didn't force you to face things in yourself and in your world that you don't want to face, and make realizations which must inevitably, if you were to make them, result in change in yourself. Instead, you turn away from those realizations time and time again and deny their value. If we must exist, you wish we'd shut up and be culturally good Negroes, so to speak. But we're here, and we exist, and we speak. It is the creators of the philosophy that we espouse who in America's history and past have fought and died time and time again, have crossed oceans and built new frontiers just to win us, and unfortunately in some cases you, the right to speak and to let others speak without feeling the threatened need to silence them. Of course, the need to mock them may of course be another matter, but hey, that's all right. And it is people like yourself who have sat on the sidelines the whole time culturally and Monday morning quarterbacked the entire thing. So I must speak out, like it or not, and tell you and all those who might be misled by you that the only place for a true believer in free speech is in the front lines, because that's the only place where true free speech happens, and there's no way that that could possibly hurt the media. Although I do agree with Jet and with the rest of the media group that what is harmful to the medium is when people engage in the most unbelievable paradoxical behavior using their free speech to say who should be deprived of the right to free speech or who should be not allowed to air this content. Basically what most of these complaints come down to saying is, you know, get your own venue, your own privately funded private venue, and you know, sure, then you can spout off in it just like we spout off in our newspapers, you know, and our complaints. And I just want to wrap that up by saying that if you talk about money put into community access, I would dare you to go corner all the producers of community access and find out from them, compared to what the community, as in the taxpayers who don't actually pay taxes to community access, and the various funds from which community access draws its funding. Oh yeah, don't forget Freedom Fest, which is very purpose, on July 4th on the Spare, advertisement, is to provide funding for community access while providing an event for the community to, guess what, get out there and express their opinions in a free forum. And I think if you looked at the money that goes into funding community access versus the money that the producers who produce a community access spend on their own productions, that you might be surprised by the figures there and how they probably equal out. In other words, these producers have probably put as much money into funding these productions, and therefore community access had no productions. Would Fayetteville fund it? No. Fayetteville's not going to pay money to keep an empty channel running static. You got to have the producers, and the producers are putting money into it. What is a billable hour of video production work running these days anyway? What, 85, 95 bucks an hour? Right. So these people are doing it as volunteer work, and yet with all the skill, as a matter of fact, Quarter Moon Productions and several of the other producers are paid producers on the side to support their video addiction, is what it comes down to, and that's what they bill at. And so that being the case, if you counted the volunteer hours that these skilled producers put into filming, editing, directing, and so on and so forth, you know, I would say that since they do more jobs than what ordinarily falls under normal production, that they probably ought to be paid a good bit more than the normal $85 or $95 an hour wages on that, you know, that ought to be figured in, because it's labor that community access is getting for free that's worth that much an hour. But even if you just kept it down to industry standard and discounted all the extra jobs that they're doing, I would still bet, knowing myself what it takes hours of work-wise to create even a half an hour, 45-minute production, I would make a good solid bet that the independent producers, all of them together, put more money into community access and more money's worth into community access than the city does. So chew on that for a while.
Okay.
And stuff.
Yeah, so let's see, do we just want to pick this argument apart?
Ooh, could be fun.
Okay, let's try to keep it brief though.
Yeah.
Let's see, I'll just read a part and you can respond accordingly if it just comes to you. The community's button is being pushed again by a group of video-based challengers of all things tasteful. Tasteful, anyone have any thoughts on tasteful?
Well, oh boy. I mean, I think you said it best with your whole quote of Helmut Newton.
Yeah. The two greatest threats to photography are the words taste and odor.
Yeah.
Well, I think I can add one sentence to that, which is that taste is completely a matter of opinion. You know, in whose opinion all things tasteful. There are people who think Velvet Elvises, you know, in neon colors are tasteful, and they hang them on their walls. Do I agree? No. Do I want to censor their right to do it? No. Who cares? Tasteful. Meaningless definition, meaningless statement.
Well, okay, well, why do you think this guy didn't cite us? I mean, he talks about us. He never really, you know, what is it, the 5 W's of journalism, who, what, why, when, where, and how, which has the W at the end, I guess.
I will just interject in that point to say that, by the way, analyzing this as an English major, grammatically and structurally, and then, you know, my mother was a newspaper reporter and she taught me to do journalistic writing, so analyzing this as an example of journalistic writing if I was running a journalism school, I would have sent this back with a do-over or receive D-. As far as, and I really feel that even an editorial ought to be held to journalistic standards. Other papers do it.
Right, right. But I mean, so this guy knows how to cite. Why don't you think that he cited? I mean, why didn't he cite specific
He knows how to
examples?
cite.
He doesn't mention us, he mentions Friends of Fayetteville.
Yeah, perhaps it's because he would like to cut us down, but doesn't want to give us any kind of publicity. Perhaps.
I guess.
Honestly, my opinion on that, Jet, you've already heard. My opinion on that is that he doesn't mention these people by name, partly because of the middle class mentality that, doesn't say we want to keep them dang niggers out of here. It says, oh, there's just certain elements that have been moving into the neighborhood that disturbs us, and partly because there are some things that he comes right out and blatantly says about, yes, the Abbey of the Lemur, see, I'll say it, show that verge up on the edges of slander and libel and things that are not legal to say in a private newspaper. It steps right up to the edges of it. I did a little research on that after I had a conversation with you a week or so back, and he steps right up to the legal gray area edge of it in a few statements that he makes. So I don't know, it's just my opinion.
The program's participants, known for their push the limits, vulgar approach to whatever they want to push for the viewers, are at it again using the medium to display their tiresome demonstrations of simulated sexual acts that somewhere in their mind make some sort of point. All the while the makers of this dribble delude themselves into thinking they are making relevant social commentary, and that pushing the limits of free speech in and of itself is a worthwhile exercise.
Well, first off, the guy's so far off base, it's not funny because he goes with the assumption that the only thing going on here is us pushing the limits of free speech, and that's a worthwhile exercise. Well, I think it is, but again, with the assumption that that's all that's going on, I mean, right away he disqualifies himself as a judge of what's going on because he fails to mention, well, we've broken it all down already.
And I must add that journalistically speaking, a stated assumption of what someone else thought or felt or believed without a direct quote, written or verbal from them on that,
Or description from the specific.
or description from their specific actions. And again, the reason that this doesn't fall into that, push the limits, arguable, maybe, vulgar, matter of opinion, I guess that's why it's an editorial, but it's still close to the legal edge of it. Tiresome, demonstration, drivel, delude themselves, relevant, all those are matters of opinion. All those words are matters of personal opinion and are not factual words that describe factual occurrences on the show. Now, if he said, these people, do these simulated sexual acts, and I personally find them tiresome and to be dribble, and I find that I feel like they're only doing it to push the limits and so on and so forth, that would be not only more honest, but it would be more accurate, and it would be journalistically correct. I mean, I know that to a degree anything goes in an editorial, but the only thing that saves this from being completely slanderous and libelous is it's in an editorial, and to me it's a complete unprofessional attack that an editor thinks they can get away with writing this bad.
So, but even more than, he's implying that we're just to push the limits, and it's, I've been painting, drawing, writing, making videos, photography, for an awful long time. And it's always been, my content has always been not a whole lot different than it is now. Controversial, but the content is always similar. The humor has always been similar. Making tape recordings as a kid have always been similar to this, and it's not that I'm trying to push the limits, or I think that we're trying to push the limits. I think that we're just basically doing the sort of stuff that we want to do. And I write, basically the way I see it is this: we do what we do. People object to it and they try to oppose it. We defend it. It helps other people with more moderate views And basically, that is the purpose of free speech.
Yeah, one thing I was talking about in that government channel forum discussion last weekend was basically, I brought up the whole notion of domino theory, and unfortunately, what a lot of these people are setting up here is, yeah, we are out on the front line taking all the flack, but guess what? With precedents, basically, you knock us down as the first domino, it sets up a whole lot of other people to be knocked down, and folks tend
Well,
to...
the very moment that they can legislate or regulate anything about your program due to content, speaking of can of worms, the moment anybody can be censored for content, anybody, no matter what they're doing, as long as it doesn't fall under the legal definition of obscene, as you already previously did, then that means that anybody at all can be censored for any content, and it becomes a matter of the taste of the censors rather than a matter of the legality of free speech. And two tiny things that I would like to, if I may, briefly add to that is take a Socratic debate technique, acknowledged since ancient Greece, on push the limits. Okay, let's go to the diametric opposite. What if no art pushed the limits ever? Imagine a world like that. Would we still be with cave paintings of elk on our little stone walls?
Where do we even have that?
What would we have? I think we'd have velvet Elvises and Cupid dolls and pretty little landscapes. I think we'd have photorealism. I think that would be the only movement, would be photorealistic art of only topics that fall within the common mainstream overlap of, oh look, it's a photo of your family and they're all dressed and none of them are doing anything weird or making any faces. How cute. Okay, that's allowable.
Well,
No limits pushed there.
I think that there's a lot of stuff here. I think that basically what we're dealing with is a whole crew of people who never got past photorealism.
Right.
I think
That's my personal-
that may be a point. So,
Yeah, it's
as
like-
far as push the limits of free speech goes, the limits of free speech are always shrinking. Go and look at some of the new bills that George Bush has railroaded through Congress. If you don't believe that, go look at the wording of them. Government, gov.com or, whatever .gov, it's out there. Go look at it. I mean, somebody has to stay on the front lines of free speech as far as I'm concerned and keep pushing it back. It's not like we're forging out where no man has gone before into space like Captain Kirk. It's that we're going, as it was said earlier by Shannon, over the same darn territory over and over and over again. The conservatives push and we push back, and they push and we push and they push and we push.
And it's not even like we were the first ones to ever do this.
No.
And that's not to say that, that our stuff isn't original. And basically, it is. He questions that in a response back. It's like, well, you're not really breaking new ground.
No, but
you're not doing anything original.
Yeah, what he's saying is you're not, I read that, and he's saying you're not tramping over, new unprotected laws, and, well, the point is, actually, the trouble
what if you guys
is,
don't want to,
I mean, it's not necessarily breaking the obscenity laws, and, and there's no big thing here to push the obscenity laws. It's more to the effect of, well, guess what? There are lots of recording artists today, and there are a lot of people putting more and more of a mandate on controlling their material, putting stickers on their records and whatnot. What else? Or, I mean, I came up from the whole underground press thing. Fury also has connections there. A lot of us do. And I have actually seen people get harassed and prosecuted for the material they printed. And so, if we're still living in an atmosphere where stuff like that gets allowed, guess what? The fight is still valid.
I mean, it's not a question of pushing to new limits, or as Chuck says, pushing what's allowable in obscenity laws to new lows, as you would put it, or new degrees of liberality until, we're all having sex with 5-year-olds in the streets and it's Sodom and Gomorrah and smoking crack in, the schoolrooms and like that. That's not what we're going for. That's not what we're intending. That's not what we think we would create. That's not what we're trying to push. It's a matter of what we want to create and what naturally comes out of our urge to create, happens to be something that holds the line right at the boundaries, of what is not legally allowable, because it's definitely, there's never a moment's question about if it's legally allowable. That's an irrelevant issue that keeps getting raised time and time again.
Yeah, and well, it's a lot of these detractors who haven't gotten a clue yet, and it's like, going back to Emenegger, it's like, this guy must have never gotten a clue that we're not pushovers. And what these people fail to realize, and they fail to realize it again and again, is we know the laws.
Well, I think the only word that this guy has written in the editorial, and the only word that any of the complainers wrote, is the word challenging.
Yeah.
And I think the word controversial came up in a couple of the complaints too. Challenge, yes. Pushing the limits of the amount of challenge that the normal viewer, deadened and numbed to any introspection, self-examination, or actual logical, rational thought and examination of cultural values that they've just been handed and inherited, challenging their willingness to do that until someday we create a viewer of art who is willing to challenge the art right back, not on trivial issues, but rather to what it does in them.
Right.
You know?
Which moves on to this next point.
Yeah.
No bigger meaning or purpose, just seeing how far they can go before someone objects, than patting themselves on the back for prompting the revelation that some people find things offensive. Now, that takes talent.
Now, that's grossly insulting.
That's grossly insulting, and it's not true, but I think that finding out what offends people, what people find offensive, is something that's important. I mean, why are people offended? Why were people offended by the episode of Star Trek where Captain Kirk kisses a black woman? I mean, a lot of people thought, that's really offensive. The question is, why are they offended? Our stuff, basically, if it offends people...
Well, think about cream corn.
Cream corn. It's
Why is that offensive? It's people eating corn.
People eating corn
At
and
a
making
camera.
out. People eat cream corn. People make out on soap operas all day long.
You can see people eating corn on the Food Channel, and you can see people making out on Skinamax, so why is the conjunction of the two such a big deal?
Exactly.
Well, no,
And I mean, it basically brings out these social norms and conventions which nobody has questioned. And, and I think that is, it's what the Dadaists did, it's what the Surrealists did, it's what many, a lot of art is about, is basically social conventions and breaking social conventions and questioning them.
Yeah,
Self-examination.
it's holding a mirror up to society that society doesn't necessarily want to see.
That's an old quote. Art is there to hold a mirror up to life. And when you look in the mirror in the morning, you're like, wow, I need a shave, and damn, that's a big zit, and I'm losing my hair, and my eyes are bloodshot because a little too many whiskey sours last night. These are not things that you necessarily want to know about yourself, and what you see in that mirror may reflect things in your life that you wish weren't there, and you have the choice to ignore it, and say, I'm not going to do anything about this, I'm just going to turn into, an alcoholic slob, or whatever it is you're turning into, or you have the choice to do something about it, or the choice that the complainers are opting for is to attack the mirror with, both puny little fists flailing.
Right.
It's what basically comes down to, don't attack the mirror. The society that you made people like us, and if you don't like us, then don't make societies like that in your next generation.
Okay, what a waste of time and energy. They simultaneously hurt the perception of important community service thankfully offered by the city of Fayetteville.
Okay.
I'm sorry. It's like, now you can clean your nose off. The community access, you get a little something on your nose there. The community access channel.
Okay.
Okay.
I think we're going to
Are we blinking? So yeah, basically, thoughts about that?
Oh boy, are you going to
Hurts whose perceptions.
All right.
What's his perception?
Well, this is a going argument that I've heard for years, and I've heard it from certain people involved in CAT, and I've heard it from people outside, and I'm hearing it from this guy, and I've heard it from Emenegger and different other people. Is this whole notion of you're basically threatening the existence of this forum with your weird stuff, and I find it disgusting and insulting the notion that art, communication, and the free exchange of ideas should be held up as endangering a forum that exists for the free exchange of ideas.
Yeah.
And
Well, and the people
kind
who
of
are
people who
threatening the
espouse
forum
this,
are these people.
well, no, the kinds of people who espouse this belief are the real threats. And they're more than just a threat to the forum, they're basically a threat to.
Well, they're terrorists, basically, because they're, there's a hot word today in society, but they're emotional and intellectual terrorists because they're saying, in effect, if you don't stop producing things like this, then we want to remove your forum because we think it removes the validity of the forum that it lets you in there.
Right.
Yeah.
And let's keep talking.
Yeah.
Brief. We're running out of tape. Okay. Free speech is, or should be, an activity among the most cherished and important to all Americans. And free speech of ideas is the fountain from which debate flows.
Complete agreement. I wish it wasn't lip service.
And then that's the idea behind the Freedom Fest on the 4th of July. It is designed to be an Independence Day and the celebration of our freedom to express our views freely. This should be celebrated. You really think this guy feels that way? Because I don't get that.
If he truly believed that, he wouldn't object to anything we had to say.
I mean,
He thinks it should be celebrated, but celebrated only within a certain context, by certain people who don't have to say it.
Only by people in Gap jeans who make more than $35,000 a year
Yeah.
and own businesses or newspapers.
let me check the time on this. I think, no, we're still recording. Okay, well, we'll keep rolling. Okay. No, yeah, I don't think that either.
Well, I mean, it's just a going thing that we've been talking about forever. It's like freedom of speech, but let's keep it to the bourgeoisie. That's pretty much the way I'm reading it.
Right.
Can we just not have those icky bad people in there doing those icky bad things that, I don't know, that jeopardize free speech or any of those other things because we find them important.
I mean, either you've got the right to say anything as long as what you say in the act of saying it doesn't actively violate a law, like, inciting people to riot in the streets or screaming fire in a crowded theater.
Right.
You've got it or you don't.
Right.
My caveat to screaming fire in a crowded theater is,
Well, except for socially speaking.
well, it's not
Metaphorically.
good. It's not good. They bring that time and time again. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. And my caveat for years has always been unless there is one.
Unless there is
and
a
reading
fire.
editorials like this, I think there is.
There is a fire. Let's see, these folks appear to be Larry Flint wannabes. Hustler magazine has pushed yada yada yada. Basically goes on to say that the Larry Flints and Ku Klux Klans of the world have pressed the nation into uncomfortable corners, testing the commitment to keeping government from controlling speech and free expression. It's tempting, but Americans cannot give in to the occasional desire to shut someone up as long as we want our own ability to express ourselves freely. I mean, a point this guy should learn.
Lip service.
Okay. Flint was trying to start a money-making business. The Ku Klux Klan was on a mission to express their ideas. So, I mean, my take on what the guy is saying here is that basically if we were in this for the money, we would be okay, or at least we'd be not as bad or just as good as Larry Flint.
Yeah, but since this is about, the guy, obviously doesn't know any, won't tie what we do to art, but basically, it's almost like,
Well, if it's not what he recognizes as art, and if it's not what he recognizes as profit, then it has no value, apparently.
yeah. Well, and then there was one. We're all getting a little tired of the rebuttal thing. Truth to tell, we'd all like to just start getting back to having fun with this. And, I don't know. Speaking personally for me, I've about gotten to the point where I can't even relate to that kind of thing anymore. I don't know. It's kind of funny. Somewhere in my video collection, I've got a performance of Lenny Bruce doing one of his final shows back before he died. And he spends probably 3/4 or more of that show talking about the transcripts, reading the transcripts to his obscenity trial. I don't feel that way right now. A lot of us involved in Abbey of Lemur feel that way about now. And, scratch my ear. Anyway, we all kind of feel that way about now. Kind of like we've made self-defense a kind of shtick at this point. And I'm not going to knuckle under to the line of thought that it's unnecessary, but at the same time, it's getting a little tiresome, it's getting a little old. We'd all like to kind of put it behind us. Get back to having fun with this crap. Anyway, I felt a need to kind of wrap things up here. As far as the Emenegger flap, the Emenegger Harton flap, and whatnot. I honestly don't feel as though Greg Harton was particularly out of line, for the most part, with his rebuttal of the show or his rabid editorializing or whatever. Certain friends involved with the show have talked about how they don't think it's much different from hate speech. And with due respect to those folks who are good friends, I don't know that I agree with that. I don't know that it's any more hate speech than the average bad movie review. But we should bear a few things in mind. I think that Greg Harton's editorials and a lot of the very slanted issues, a lot of the very slanted reporting from the Northwest Arkansas Times have brought to light the fact that, I don't think there's any way you can say, judging from the reports, from some of the statements that Bob Emenegger made at a government channel roundtable that I was part of, that you would be hard-pressed to prove to me that Northwest Arkansas Times / Greg Harton wasn't and weren't in bed with Emenegger somehow. It seems to me as though they're in cahoots very closely. So when you read the article, when you read Harton's original editorial back on, June 15th, something to that effect, 15th, 16th, somewhere around there, it seems to me as though, what can you say, doesn't mention us, doesn't mention the complainant proper, but he does manage to promote Bob's social group / show. And that's not a cut down toward the organization Friends for Fayetteville. There are lots of good people involved in that organization, and I tend to think that a lot of their aims are good. But Bob invokes Greg, Greg invokes Bob. We've seen different examples of that over the last month. And you would be hard-pressed to prove to me that it was all a coincidence. Now, let's be perfectly honest here. Some guy, regardless of how influential, wealthy he may be, whining about a TV show on the cat, that's not headline news. It's not headline news at all. So why is it making headlines? It doesn't make sense. Does not compute. Doesn't make sense at all. So why is it that on the eve of Freedom Fest, when Freedom Fest should be grabbing up headlines, Bob Emenegger's complaint against the Abbey of the Lemur is the thing that's grabbing up headlines? I mean, 50-point lettering right up at the top of the paper. Makes no sense. It really makes no sense. And what's even stranger is the fact that the Northwest Arkansas Times were one of the quote-unquote sponsors of Freedom Fest. And yet you see a headline and 2 pages worth of Bob Emenegger's complaint and a little tiny inset about Freedom Fest. What's that all about? You know, I mean, Buddy Hackett died that day, or the day before, whatever it was. Some guy whining about a TV show gets precedence over Buddy Hackett dying. Tell me that makes sense. That doesn't even make sense. And, I don't know, what can I say? I rest my case. Now, it seems to me, assuming that these folks are in bed together, and I think there's more than enough proof to, I think there's more than enough evidence to prove that. It really begs the question, why is Bob and or his friends in the media out to undermine Freedom Fest? Did they undermine Freedom Fest in the press? Yes, they did. Would Freedom Fest have gotten a bigger turnout had things been devoted to Freedom Fest rather than to Bob's complaint? Well, we're never going to know the answer to that question. But I think a lot of this boils down to class. At this point, a week has passed since the CAT board meeting, and Bob made a lot of interesting statements regarding the promotion of Fayetteville via the CAT, the image presented of Fayetteville via the CAT, certain elements, in other words, us, and the face we might present of Fayetteville via the CAT. And so much of it boils down to class, it's not funny. Now, Greg Harton, when responding to Jet Black's queries, has been quoted as saying, I think that you folks are denigrating, those are his words, denigrating to the community. And how many years now have we been railing about perception of the community and who the community consists of? And there are a certain group of people whose picture of the community creates a great deal of pull in the political aspects of the community. Bob Emenegger falls into that group, and he proved it with a lot of the statements he made at the CAT board meeting. It's very obvious that Greg Harton is in agreement with that. When people talk about the community, and we've railed about this for years, check it out, look back on our catalog of tapes and shows and whatever, people talk about a specific part of the community, and it's the quote-unquote merchant or professional class. They're not talking about the working class. They're not talking about ordinary folks. They're not talking about anything I or Lord knows how many other folks can relate to.
They are talking about moneyed people, moneyed interests and whatnot, who they're trying to bring into the community. The next episode of the Abbey of the Lemur will focus on people that will focus on the cat board meeting, and you will actually see some of Bob's statements, and a lot of it will pertain to professional class people and the people that they're trying to pull in, and the fact that ordinary folks, quote-unquote vulgar people, etc., 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 and the image they might cast of Fayetteville. There are people who would like to take public access and take it out of the hands of the public and give it to certain other interests who would turn it into kind of a big PR tool. And, well, boosting the economy of this town is probably in itself not a bad idea. A lot of ordinary folks stand to get their tongues yanked out of their mouths. A lot of people with unorthodox views, a lot of people with something else to say could stand to kind of lose their voice as a result of this ploy. It's kind of funny, though. Why did these people seek to undermine or sabotage Freedom Fest? Again, that's a question I can't answer, and perhaps we'll never know. But a lot of it does seem to stem from a particular group of people, some of which are very well connected politically, who would like to turn public access into a big PR, a big public relations stunt as opposed to actual public access. I guess that would be what they call least access. I've been down on the Gulf Coast over the last few years, once every year at least, and they have what they call public access down there. And basically what it is, when you get a look at it, is 24 hours of real estate commercials. Think of that as a wave of the future. That's what some people want to turn this station into. Anyway, a few things have happened since then, leading up to the cat board meeting, which we'll be seeing on the next episode of the Abbey of the Lemur. One particular member of Friends for Fayetteville, and it goes right back to my saying that I don't necessarily consider this group a bad outfit. One particular member of this group, and a member who has actually been fairly close to Bob, sent out an email, and this email at this point has been circulated around the city. And this person so much as states, no, we didn't stand behind Bob. In fact, I tried to discourage Bob from pursuing this. He didn't listen to me. He didn't listen to a lot of people. In fact, only one other person in Friends for Fayetteville backed him on this. In fact, there were about 2 people in the city who backed him on this, both of these people being high-ranking city officials. And this email has gone out all over the city to various points all over the city, in the government, in the media, etc., etc., etc. And I'm not going to mention those 2 high-ranking city officials' names, but they know who they are, and we know who they are, and we're watching them. One of these guys actually, during Freedom Fest, walked up and glad-handed me and had the gall to sit there and say, hey, see, you've been showing up a lot in the media lately. Well, yeah, and of course, retrospect being the thing that it is, I didn't come up with the better comeback, but what I probably should have told him was, Well, I saw your name in an email recently. It wasn't very pretty. Best case scenario, we could assume that Bob was up there at City Hall rattling his saber, because we all know that noise was being made about this in a disgusting backdoor kind of way up to almost 2 weeks before Bob issued his official complaint. But perhaps these high-ranking city officials said to him, you know, we're sick of listening to you flapping your gums. Go through the proper channels. Worst case scenario, and I hate to be cynical, but I'm betting on the worst case scenario, these high-ranking city officials used Bob as a civilian proxy to enforce their will. And boy, is that dirty. And boy, is that ugly. And some of us are registered voters. Think about it. In the meantime, I must say that prior to all this blowing up in the media, I was told by a friend, there's one guy in the media you need to watch out for, and his name is Mike Masterson. He's a reporter for the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, and he and Bob run in the same crowd. Well, it's July 10th, and lo and behold, in the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, right after we got done, a week after we got done cutting Bob to shreds at the CAP board meeting, and punching holes in his erroneous statements and watching him not stick to his guns because he looked down and pretty much figured out he didn't have any guns, Mike Masterson issues a pretty ugly rebuttal which pretty much bashes the Abbey of the Lemur in kind of a, what at this point is a very scripted kind of way. I'm not going to go into it. It's pretty much a waste of my time. But he kind of juxtaposes the two situations between the support for Northwest Arkansas Art Council and the current flap, the current manufactured flap that Bob's generated over the Abbey of the Lemur. And he makes a few very telling statements here. Not going to read you most of this article because it's not really even worth a wad of toilet paper, but he says, it is no revelation that an inclusive, boy isn't that a laugh, and well-organized art community is a definitive draw for the best and brightest executives worldwide who are constantly being recruited by our major corporations. That's funny. So we have statements from Bob back at the last CAB meeting about his concerns for people coming into Arkansas looking for executive positions and what seeing the Abbey of the Lemur on TV might do to their aspirations as far as living in Fayetteville. And now we have this clown Masterson who, as we've heard now, is a friend of Emenegger's. And he says, pretty much issues the same kind of statement. These people are concerned with the upper classes and the upper classes image of Fayetteville. They think of public access as a PR tool and nothing more. That is what they would like to see it become. So all you working class folks, activists, and whatever else, this is what you are now up against. You are up against the gentrification crowd. You're up against people who are looking at their peers, moneyed people or middle to upper class people, and no one else. Because if you're in a social strata below that, basically, you're not really human beings. That's the way I read all of this. And I think these folks would be the last to admit it, but screw it. I gotta call it like I see it, and that's exactly how I see it. He also mentions up here, and it's pretty funny. What is it he says here? After all, one seeks to promote all forms of legitimate artistic expression. Legitimate artistic expression. So here's someone who seeks to legitimize one facet of the arts while condemning another. And this whole crowd seems to kind of go with this mentality. And this mentality is not at all what public access is about. Public access is about autonomy across the board. Everybody gets the same rights. Everybody gets free expression. And that's all there is to it. But we're dealing with this kind of bourgeoisie that doesn't seem to understand this. Well, I think we've uncovered them, and we're going to be doing a lot more of that in the next episode. So, until we further uncover your lies, I'm going to say hi to our friends in the bourgeoisie and tell them to cram it. See you next time.
Saying to someone that, you know, if a new family came to town who was looking for an executive position at here in Fayetteville, and they happened to go to the Radisson Hotel, and they tuned in and saw that particular one, not the other, but that particular one, I wonder what kind of an impression they might get of Fayetteville. I say, where's this coming from? What's coming down the street here at our little local
And I hope you don't mind my asking, but is this a complaint or is it a political power play? That's one thing I just wanted to kind of ask. The main reason, there are a few reasons I was wondering that, but I guess the main one is that in the context of the complaint, you ask the CAT manager a couple of very loaded questions. One is, do you consider this show acceptable material for this community? And a couple of the things that I don't know, that to me almost comes over like the riddle of the Sphinx, because the show was made by members of the community, for one, and second of all, the CAT manager does not dictate what is acceptable material for the community. That's part of policy. As a former CAT board president, you know this, so why are you asking the question?
So why complain about this one show? As Ms. Sherrills pointed out earlier, why would you watch this unless you wanted to be offended? Why indeed? In the media, the complainant is quoted as saying he just stumbled on that particular show or was channel surfing and came across it. As a matter of fact, ladies and gentlemen, earlier that day, the complainant was present at a meeting of the Video Independent Producers Association at which I was also present. and Abbey of the Lemur co-producer C.F. Roberts announced the live show would be produced and aired that night. The complainant knew it would be on TV.